Hello everybody, this is Mr. Mob coming at you with another APUSH video. This is our second part looking at topic 5.5, which is continuing to kind of, showcase the differences that are continuing to emerge between the North and the South, these, sectional differences, sectionalism as is commonly called, that will kind of promote conflict, bringing us ever closer to the Civil War. Now, some of this is going to be a little bit of review, some of it's going to be news, so just kind of keep in mind that this is just kind of an enduring theme as we go through the Antebellum Era, this idea of continued growing difference between the North and the South, economically, socially, culturally, all that kind of stuff. So, with that being said, let's take a look at some economic factors that are going to be important to keep in mind as we're going through this period. And as we've said before, industrialization is starting to happen. And of course, this is going to be, the vast majority of it will be taking place in the North, particularly in the New England region. Lots of new factories that are going to be popping up. A lot of it is going to be based on, promoting, or creating textiles used from southern cotton. But you're going to be seeing the use of industrialization popping up all over the place. Going hand in hand with that is new innovations in terms of production, like sewing machines that turn those textiles into actual clothes. The telegraph to connect various parts of the North, particularly the North, in terms of faster communication. Once again, you can now have communication that might have taken weeks previously now be done in a single day. And to give you kind of the sense of how forward the North is moving technologically, here's a really important thing to keep in mind. By the time the Civil War starts in the 1860s, a typical Northerner is now buying most of their clothes outside the home at some type of retail store, something along those lines. Something that we can definitely identify with today. In the South, not nearly that same level of buying clothes outside of home. But of course, the big infrastructure difference between the North and the South is going to be found in the growth of the railroads. Now, we talked previously about how canals were an important innovation starting in the 1820s to connect various parts of the North together. We talked about the Erie Canal, for example, in New York State. But the heyday of the canals is really only going to last about 15, 20 years max, and will be replaced by the railroad, as we kind of mentioned before. And the railroad is just going to spread like a virus across the northern half of the United States, connecting every big city and sizable town all over the northern half of the United States, with minimal lines being constructed in the South. All this is going to do is further connect the industrial base of the United States, being able to move raw materials to factories, to turn them into finished products, and then ship those finished products to various customer bases across the country. Very, very significant. You have the ability now to ship goods in a single day that would have taken weeks previously. Now, note, this is not going to be done just by, private capital investment. A lot of it is going to be aided by the U.S. government. As we'll talk later on this year, a lot of this is going to be spurred by a willingness by the federal government, particularly out in more frontier areas out to the west, of providing land grants to these railroad companies and giving them not just the actual piece of property that is where the track's going to be laid, but giving them free acreage adjacent to either side of the rail lines, which they would then be able to sell for a profit in terms of, places to build homes and hotels and, all sorts of things. And notes, the railroad is going to be one of the major advantages that the Union Army is going to be having in the upcoming Civil War. The big thing being is that you can now, with the railroad, very quickly move men, military supplies, food, everything you need from any part of the North, be it Boston, be it Chicago, Cincinnati, whatever, and get it right to the South where the war is going to be fought. The South is not going to be able to do anything like that. So this is one of the many reasons why the Union is going to have a big advantage in the Civil War. Now, another important event that's going to help to kind of define sectionalism in the 1850s is going to be what will be, at least at the time, the worst economic panic that the United States had suffer through at this point in time. And this is the Panic of 1857. And as we see in American history, about every generation, there's a bubble that bursts, and it's almost always the result of over-speculation, meaning over-investment in something in the economy. It could be land, it could be housing, it could be stocks. In this case, in the 1850s, it was mostly over-investment in rail lines. And so what you saw happening was that too much money was invested in rail lines at a given time. It was not becoming as profitable as intended. People started selling off stocks of shares of railroad companies. And so you start to see this kind of house of cards collapse. And it's going to be massively impactful in the northern half of the United States. We're going to see a number of businesses fail. We see growing unemployment. Farmers out in the West are going to be losing some territory, or losing farms to some degree and stuff like that. So it's really going to be problematic in especially the northern half of the country. However, and this is part of why this is kind of showcasing sectionalism, in the southern half of the United States, not nearly as impactful. The South's cotton economy is still strong. It's still robust. There's a global demand for this product, and this is going to be very significant moving forward. This makes the South believe that their economy can still be very lucrative and profitable, independent of the northern economy. And what this kind of tells the South is that cotton truly is king, that it is economically invincible. And if the South can survive economically on their own, well, that might give you a little bit more of a willingness to try to do it politically on your own. So the idea being is that, hey, if you're the South, like, hey, if the folks in the North and in Congress start to get cute and really try to destroy slavery, and we feel that our backs are against the wall, we could maybe make this work. We could maybe secede from the Union and be able to make it financially. So this is going to be very important to keep in mind. And of course, speaking of slavery, of course, is going to be continuing to divide the nation as we continue to go through the 1850s. One of the components of the Compromise of 1850 that was previously mentioned was the new, infamous, and much stronger Fugitive Slave Law. And what it enables Southerners to do is to have much more of a freer ability to capture runaway slaves. First off, with this being a federal law, any runaway slave that was arrested would now be facing charges in a federal court. And that's going to be important because in a federal court, you're more likely to have people that are sympathetic to slavery as opposed to being captured in Massachusetts and having to go to a Massachusetts court where, there really wasn't much sympathy for slavery. So that's going to be significant. Also, as we mentioned previously, this new law is going to mandate that local police authorities, local law enforcement, will have to aid in the capture of runaway slaves. So once again, if you're a bounty hunter and you have left South Carolina to go to Indiana, where in Indiana there's no slavery, local authorities there would have to help you in trying to capture a specific runaway slave. And for many, this is going to be a total anathema. The idea being is that you would be then compelled to engage in aiding an institution that you found to be morally disgusting. So this is going to be something else that really, really inflames the northern half of the United States and only further rallies the abolitionist cause. And as the abolitionist cause is picking up more steam, this is only going to give more power to the Underground Railroad system, as we mentioned before, that was secretly smuggling slaves out of the South and into northern free states, and maybe in many cases up to Canada. So understand that this is something that's going to inflame the South. The idea being is, from a Southern perspective, the Underground Railroad is a conspiracy by the North to destroy their way of life. And of course, the Fugitive Slave Law in the North is viewed as the Southern way of life being imposed on them as Americans. So understand that different components of life are going to be inflammatory to different regions of the country based on what's going on. And speaking of inflammatory, whoo, when we talk about writing of the 1850s, a lot of this is going to be focused on the issue of slavery and will only further the divide that exists between the North and South. And one of these is going to be the work Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was, fun fact, living in Cincinnati when she was doing research for this book. Now, Uncle Tom's Cabin is basically a story that showcases, the brutality of slavery and the idea that African American slaves at the end of the day are, good and holy and just, and, they're an oppressed people, and, all this kind of stuff. But note, it's fictional. This is not like the narrative of Frederick Douglass, where it's somebody's, personal experiences, personal anecdotes that are being written about. This is a fictional story. Now, Stowe is going to be claiming that even though it's a fictional story, it's inspired by the reality of slavery. While living in Cincinnati, Cincinnati at this time is a border city. Right across the Ohio River, slavery is legal in Kentucky. And so, she had contacts with people in the Underground Railroad that would smuggle slaves into Cincinnati to freedom. And so there was, this sense that she kind of knew what slavery was about, except she had never truly been to the South. She'd never visited. She'd never lived there. She'd never been amongst slaves, in terms of actual slaves in the South. And so understand that this book has two very, very important effects happening simultaneously. One is going to be that in the North, this is going to further galvanize abolition. The idea of, see, this is the reality of slavery. See how evil and immoral and corrupt this institution is. See why we have to destroy it. But from a Southern perspective, Uncle Tom's Cabin is nothing more than just abolitionist propaganda. It's going to be viewed as an attempt to smear the Southern way of life, to destroy the Southern way of life, and written by somebody that has no credibility, somebody that has no ability to actually show what's going on. It's just abolitionist propaganda. So as powerful as this book becomes in the North, and as popular as it becomes in the North, that's how reviled and despised it will be in the South. Now, another important work that's not nearly as famous historically, but still significant, is Hitting Our Helper's Impending Crisis of the South. And what Helper does is try to take a very logical perspective in terms of the impact of slavery in the South. And basically what Helper is doing in this work is showcasing what has already been happening for a generation or more in America, that the North is becoming more progressive, it is becoming more economically advanced, it is moving in a progressive direction, and Helper is saying that that is because that the North does not rely on the institution of slavery, and because the South has relied on slavery, it has stunted its economic development. It has, been the cause for limited railroad development, limited telegraph development, limited industrialization, limited urbanization. That all of these things, industrialization, urbanization, all this kind of technological, stuff like that, these are signs of progress. And this is what the North's doing. And this is going to pay off for the North. Helper's going to be arguing long term. In the South, they're not going that direction, which only limits or retards their ability to innovate in an important way. So for Helper, the idea is you have to eliminate slavery. Now, note, this is not written from a perspective of particularly the morality of slavery, but from a more of a sense of, development economically and in terms of infrastructure. When it came to matters of race, Helper was pretty racist. He believed that slavery should be abolished and blacks should be repatriated out of the country. But once again, the idea that this is going to be, very inflammatory. In the South, as we talked about before, the South is going to respond to these works by basically justifying the use of slavery as depicted in the Bible. And once again, the argument being that, slaves are better taken care of in the South than blacks are in the North because they are ignored, yada, yada. So understand, that, there's this growing rift over the justification of slavery as we go through this time period. All right, we'll leave it for there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.